A famous director made racist comments on set. What Clint Eastwood did next ended his career forever. It was September 1987, and Hollywood was buzzing about Thunder Valley, one of the year's most anticipated westerns. The film had everything: a $40 million budget, A-list stars, and Academy Award-winning director Mitchell Barnes at the helm. Barnes was Hollywood royalty. 3 Oscars, a dozen nominations, and a reputation as one of the industry's most demanding perfectionists. Studios fought to finance his projects. Actors begged for roles in his films. But Mitchell Barnes had a secret that had been carefully hidden by publicists and studio executives for 2 decades. He was a racist, not the cartoonish, obvious kind that made headlines. Barnes was smart enough to keep his views mostly private, expressed only in closed-door meetings and whispered conversations with people he trusted, but his prejudices ran deep and affected every aspect of his filmmaking. Thunder Valley was supposed to be different. The script called for a diverse cast, including significant roles for African American, Native American, and Latino actors. It was a story about different communities coming together in the Old West, fighting against corruption and injustice. Clint Eastwood had signed on as both star and executive producer, drawn by the script's themes of justice and unity. At 57, he was at the height of his career, coming off the success of Pale Rider and looking for projects with substance. What Clint didn't know was that Barnes had only agreed to direct the film after the studio promised he could adjust the script to minimize the roles of minority characters. The trouble started during the first week of filming. Danny Washington was a 32-year-old actor from Chicago, trained at Juilliard, with credits in several respected theater productions. He'd been cast as Marcus Freeman, a Civil War veteran turned deputy sheriff, a substantial supporting role that required him to appear in multiple scenes with Clint's character. On Tuesday of the first week, Barnes was setting up a scene where Danny's character confronts a group of corrupt businessmen. It was a pivotal moment that established Freeman as intelligent, principled, and courageous. "Danny," Barnes said during rehearsal, his voice carrying that clipped authority that came from decades of directing, "I need you to play this differently." "How so?" Danny asked. "Less articulate, more subservient. This is 1870. Your character would be more deferential to white authority figures." Danny looked confused. "The script has him standing up to corruption. That's the whole point of the scene. The script needs to be realistic," Barnes replied. "Audiences won't believe a black man speaking like that to white businessmen in the post-Civil War era." Several crew members exchanged uncomfortable glances, but nobody said anything. Directors often made script changes during filming. "With respect, Mr. Barnes," Danny said carefully, "there were plenty of educated black men in positions of authority during Reconstruction. Deputy sheriffs, politicians, teachers. Marcus Freeman's background establishes that he's educated." Barnes's expression hardened. "Are you directing this film? Or am I?" "You are, sir. I'm just trying to understand the character motivation. The motivation is that you do what I tell you to do." The scene was shot with Danny delivering his lines as written, but Barnes made it clear through his attitude that he wasn't happy about it. The next incident happened 2 days later, during a scene involving Maria Santos, a Latina actress playing the local school teacher. Barnes had been increasingly critical of her performance, despite the fact that she was delivering exactly what the script required. "Maria," Barnes said after the 3rd take, "you're too assertive." School teachers in frontier towns were quiet, humble women, especially Mexican school teachers. "The character is American," Maria corrected gently. "Born in California, and the script describes her as strong-willed and independent." "I don't care what the script says," Barnes snapped. "I need you to be more authentic to the period." "What do you mean by authentic?" Maria asked. Barnes paused, seemingly realizing he was about to say something problematic in front of 40 crew members. "Just tone it down," he said finally, but his real thoughts came out during the lunch break, when he thought he was speaking privately to his assistant director, Tommy Klein. "These minority actors don't understand historical context," Barnes said, loud enough for several people to overhear. "They want to play these roles like they're modern civil rights leaders instead of what these people actually were, grateful to have any job at all. Tommy looked uncomfortable. Mitchell, maybe we should— I'm all for inclusion, Barnes continued, apparently not noticing Tommy's discomfort. But there's a limit to how much you can stretch historical credibility. These people need to remember their place in the narrative. Word of Barnes's comments spread quickly through the crew. By evening, several people were talking about what they'd heard. By the next morning, the story had reached Clint. Clint's first response was to speak directly with Danny Washington and Maria Santos. "Are you comfortable with how you're being directed?" Clint asked during a private meeting in his trailer. Danny and Maria exchanged glances. They were both experienced enough to know that complaining about a director, especially an Oscar winner, could damage their careers. "It's challenging," Danny said diplomatically. "He seems to have very specific ideas about our characters," Maria added. "What kind of specific ideas?" Clint pressed. After some encouragement, they told him about Barnes's comments and demands. Clint listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Has anyone else witnessed these conversations?" Clint asked. "Several crew members," Danny said, "but I don't think anyone wants to get involved." "They shouldn't have to," Clint replied. "This is my responsibility as executive producer." That afternoon, Clint arranged to observe Barnes directing a scene involving Joseph Crow Feather, a Native American actor playing a tribal chief who allies with the protagonists. What Clint witnessed was worse than he'd expected. "Joseph," Barnes said during setup, "I need you to speak more primitively, use simpler words, grunt more. This character isn't supposed to sound like he went to Harvard." "The script has him speaking eloquent English," Joseph said. "It establishes that he's been educated by missionaries." "Forget the script for a minute," Barnes said. "Think about what audiences expect. They want authentic Indians, not some politically correct fantasy." Joseph's jaw tightened, but he remained professional. "I'd prefer to play the character as written, and I'd prefer to direct a movie that makes sense." Barnes shot back. "You're playing a savage who learned some English, not Sitting Bull giving a TED Talk." The word savage hung in the air like a slap. Clint stood up from his chair. Every person on set noticed the movement. "Mitchell," Clint said, his voice cutting through the suddenly quiet set. "Can I speak with you privately?" Barnes looked annoyed at the interruption, but followed Clint to a corner of the soundstage. "We need to discuss your directing approach," Clint said quietly. "What about it?" "The comments you're making to the minority actors are inappropriate." Barnes's face flushed. "Clint, I've been directing films since before you were famous. I know how to handle actors. Calling a Native American actor a savage isn't handling anything. It's just racism." "Don't be ridiculous. It's about historical accuracy." "No," Clint said, his voice still quiet, but carrying an edge now that made Barnes nervous. "It's about your personal prejudices affecting the quality of this film." "I don't have to listen to this." "Actually, you do. I'm the executive producer, and right now, I'm telling you that your behavior is unacceptable and needs to stop immediately." Barnes looked around, realizing that their conversation was being watched by the entire crew. "Are you threatening me?" Barnes asked. "I'm informing you that if you continue to direct minority actors based on racist stereotypes rather than the script we're all here to film, there will be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" "The kind where you're no longer directing this film." Barnes laughed, a sound without humor. "You can't fire me. I have a contract. The studio hired me." "The studio hired me too, and my contract gives me final approval over all creative decisions." "You're making a big mistake, Eastwood. I'm Mitchell Barnes. I have 3 Oscars. You're a spaghetti western actor who thinks he's a filmmaker." The comment was loud enough for several crew members to hear. The atmosphere on set became electric with tension. "Mitchell," Clint said, his voice dropping to that familiar quiet rasp, "pack your things." "Excuse me? You're fired. Security will escort you off the lot." Barnes looked around, apparently expecting support or intervention from someone. He found neither. "This is insane. You can't fire me for doing my job." "I'm not firing you for doing your job. I'm firing you for being a racist who's creating a hostile work environment for professional actors." "Racist? I'm not a racist. I've worked with black actors before." "And how did you direct them?" Clint asked. Barnes opened his mouth to respond, then seemed to realize that anything he said would only make things worse. "You'll never work in this town again," Barnes shouted as security arrived. "Neither will you," Clint replied calmly. Within 2 hours, Mitchell Barnes was off the lot. Within 6 hours, word of his firing had spread throughout Hollywood. Within 24 hours, entertainment journalists were calling for details. Clint took over directing duties himself, something he'd done before but never under these circumstances. His first action was to call a meeting with the entire cast. "We're going to finish this film the way it was written," Clint announced. "Every character will be played with dignity, intelligence, and respect for the actors bringing them to life." He turned specifically to Danny, Maria, and Joseph. "I want you to play these roles exactly as you understand them. No compromises, no stereotypes, no limitations, except what's actually written on the page." The transformation on set was immediate. Actors who had been walking on eggshells suddenly relaxed into their performances. Scenes that had felt forced and uncomfortable under Barnes became natural and powerful. Danny Washington's deputy sheriff became the intelligent, principled lawman the script intended. Maria Santos's school teacher emerged as a strong, independent woman fighting for her community. Joseph Crow Feather's tribal chief was dignified, wise, and eloquent. But the story of Barnes's firing was spreading beyond Hollywood. Entertainment reporters who called Barnes for comment got an earful of his real opinions. Apparently feeling he had nothing left to lose, Barnes gave several interviews where he defended his directing choices and criticized what he called politically correct casting. "I was trying to maintain historical authenticity," he told Variety. "These minority actors wanted to play fantasy versions of what their people were really like in the Old West." "And what were they really like?" the reporter asked. Barnes's answer ended his career, grateful for whatever opportunities they were given by white society, not equal partners in some mythical multicultural paradise. The interview was published on a Thursday. By Friday, every major studio in Hollywood had quietly removed Barnes from their approved directors list. Thunder Valley was completed on schedule and under budget. The film became both a critical and commercial success, earning over $200 million worldwide and receiving 5 Academy Award nominations. More importantly, it became a template for how Westerns could portray the Old West's actual diversity, rather than the whitewashed version that had dominated the genre for decades. Danny Washington's performance earned him an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Maria Santos's role led to starring parts in 3 major films over the next 2 years. Joseph Crow Feather became one of Hollywood's most sought-after Native American actors. Mitchell Barnes never directed another major studio film. The few producers who considered hiring him were deterred by the reputation he'd gained for creating hostile work environments. He eventually moved to Europe, where he directed small independent films until his death in 2003. Years later, Danny Washington was asked about the experience in an interview. "Clint Eastwood didn't just fire a racist director," he said. "He sent a message to the entire industry that professional racism wouldn't be tolerated on his productions. That meant more than any individual role ever could." Maria Santos, now a successful producer herself, put it more simply. "Clint saw our dignity being attacked and decided that was unacceptable. It's what any decent person should do, but in Hollywood in 1987, it was revolutionary." The story became a case study in film schools about the responsibility of producers and how individual actions can change industry culture. The incident established Clint as someone who wouldn't tolerate discrimination in any form on his productions. Word spread quickly that his sets were safe spaces for actors of all backgrounds, leading to some of the most diverse casting of the era. To this day, "These people need to remember their place in the narrative" is remembered as one of the most career-ending statements in Hollywood history. If this story of standing up for dignity and equality moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to remember that silence in the face of prejudice makes us complicit. Have you ever witnessed someone stand up against discrimination when it would have been easier to stay silent? Share your story in the comments.